All right. So next on our journey through the executive branch, we talked about already benefits, retirement benefits, and qualifications of the executive, both the president and the governor. We've also talked about um, the bureaucracy, that weird word. All right, so how we divide up labor in the executive branch. And today we're going to talk about roles of the executive. So, what is the executive branch actually supposed to accomplish? Granted, they divide all the labor up, but what is the actual labor that they're doing? Okay, so what do they do from day to day? All right, we're going to talk about roles of the president first because we're going to work our way down the upside down triangle: federal, state, and local. All right, so we've got the 8 roles of the president. They're also called hats of the president. The president doesn't actually wear 8 hats in a day. That's just weird. All right, we're talking about 8 roles that the president actually has. All right, so the first role we're going to talk about is chief executive. All right, this is the president enforcing the law, managing the bureaucracy. So this is the group that helps enforce all the laws everywhere, every day. All right, so this is like the president has recently fired the Secretary of State and replaced the former Secretary of State with the person who used to head up the FBI, and then whoever is in charge of the FBI, he replaced them. So hiring and firing, making sure that people have all the resources needed in order to best enforce the law in a fair way for all citizens is managing the bureaucracy. I'm going to ask that you take a little fill in the blank and make a hashtag for each one of these roles. So whatever hashtag you think best describes chief executive, I'd like you to write that down in your notes. All right, the second role is legislative leader. Okay, so there are 3 branches, and even though the president is housed inside of the executive branch, he does have quite a bit of say as to what gets passed in Congress. So the president suggests laws, which we know from our fantastic, well loved, and cared for checks and balances notes. And the president has 3 options when it comes to a bill. Remember, a bill is an idea for a law. It hasn't been signed into law yet. When a bill hits the president's desk, literally and figuratively, they can either sign it, they can pocket veto, or they can just straight up veto. And I hope you remember what pocket veto means because there's a question coming up. All right, and they also give the State of the Union address to Congress. All right, this is the speech where people were clapping literally every 4 minutes, and you were like, "Can you please stop clapping so that we can actually hear what this man has to say?" Okay, so the State of the Union is the president speaking to Congress. The Constitution says that the president must do this once per year and talk to Congress about how the United States is doing currently. All right, and again, make a hashtag for this one. So anything that has to do with laws, all right, is legislative leader. So Obamacare is not actually called Obamacare. The actual name for it is the Affordable Care Act. But President Obama suggested it, and he was the one who tried to get it pushed through Congress, so we nicknamed it Obamacare. So that is legislative leader. And a side note about the State of the Union, basically it's a here's how the whole nation is doing speech. So this whole little U shape, the president stands at the top, talks about his or her priorities for the year, and Congress either claps or does not clap. One side claps, the other one is silent. It's a very political statement, but the president must give the speech to both houses of Congress so they can all kind of get an update on how the country is doing as a group. All right. Number 3, judicial leader. All right. The president appoints judges, and I hope you know who approves because there's another question coming up. And if you don't know who approves by now, we got a problem. Okay. The president also grants pardons and amnesty and reprieves and can commute a sentence. This guy over here to the right is former Justice Antonin Scalia. Once you get appointed to the Supreme Court, we don't call you judge. You're bougie. You're real fancy. We call you justice. So this man died before he finished out his term, I guess. And you'll learn about this in Unit 6. But federal judges do not ever get fired. They get impeached if they break a law, but you can't get fired because people don't like you or they don't like how you're making decisions on a law. So this man died and it left a hole in the Supreme Court. So there are usually 9 people in the Supreme Court, and he left a hole to fill, and there were 8 people. So the president has to appoint someone, and then in order for the branches to balance out power, someone has to approve. And we talked about pardons, amnesty, reprieves, and commuting sentences already in our checks and balances notes. Poor little Antonin. All right, number 4 is Commander-in-Chief. This is you being the official leader of all 5 military branches. All right, so we don't expect the president to be an absolute expert in all things military. We don't expect the president of the United States to be the best person to give advice to SEAL Team 6 on which person to take out or whether or not to do a rescue mission for someone. However, the president is responsible, technically, for every American casualty in a time of war. If you've ever been to a military funeral, if you've ever seen one on TV, you know that every time that a military funeral happens, there is a 21-gun salute, and people will fold up a flag and hand it to someone, hand it to the next living relative of whatever person has passed away, and they will say on the behalf of the President of the United States, whatever branch of the military they're in a grateful nation, we humbly give this to you in regards to this person's service. So the president is directly responsible for every single death. And this picture right here is of Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was the guy who replaced John F. Kennedy when he passed away. And this is a picture that someone took of him in a White House conference room after he was given a report on how many people died in the Vietnam War that day. Because technically, he is directly responsible for their deaths. And people used to hold signs outside the White House that said, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Because of all the casualties that were happening in the Vietnam War. And since we don't expect the president to be an absolute expert in this, he or she is advised by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And these are the leaders of all 5 branches of the military. So whoever is a leader of Army, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, Navy, whoever is in charge of all 5 of those get together and they advise the president on how best to serve the military and how best to command the troops, since he's the commander-in-chief. All right, real quick side note while we're here at commander-in-chief. The president, we know that Congress must declare war and the president commands troops, but there's a little bit of a loophole that Congress passed this law in the 70s. It's called the War Powers Resolution. So the president can deploy up to 30,000 troops for 60 days. That's enough troops to fill the tall side of Dowdy-Ficklen Stadium at ECU. Okay, that's a lot of people. All right, and the president can deploy them for 60 days without actually declaring war. So he can put 30,000 pairs of boots on the ground for 2 months. But there is a catch. All right, he has to tell Congress that he's done this within 2 days. All right, within 48 hours, he has to tell Congress, oh, by the way, I just sent 30,000 people into another country. Surprise! All right, and Congress has to declare war. And if they don't, the president must make the order that the troops have to be withdrawn from that country within 30 days. So he can send them up for up to 2 months, and if Congress says, no, we are not declaring war, bring them home, he has a month to do that. All right, it's going to take a long time for you to move 30,000 people plus ammunition, supplies, cargo. It's going to take a long time to move that out of a country, so they're given 30 days to withdraw. All right, this is only used in special circumstances, though. All right. Moving on up to chief diplomat, all right? The president is the leader of relations with other countries. If we had to fly all 535 members of Congress around every time we wanted to have something done with another country, it would take us forever. Nothing would ever get done because you're going to have to take 2 737 jets to just get them where they need to be. All right, so the president is the leader of relations with other countries. He's the living embodiment of the United States, if you will. Okay, he or she is the only person allowed to make treaties. And now we know from world history, a treaty usually brings peace. And it's an agreement between 2 countries, and typically, again, it brings peace. So the president is in charge of this. Now, you don't have to have a treaty to end a war. You might have a treaty to help trade with someone, or to like you might have a treaty with Russia or with North Korea to not use nuclear weapons on each other. Now, there was never a war between us and North Korea, but you are bringing some kind of peace anyway. All right, so if you're talking to someone from another country, like this man is the Prime Minister of India, right, this is the Indian flag, then that means you are performing your role as a diplomat, okay, someone who is involved with other countries. All right, number 6 is economic leader. All right, you suggest the budget, but you got to send it to Congress for approval because Congress passes laws. All right, he appoints the head of what's called the Federal Reserve, and basically, in a nutshell, the Federal Reserve is the agency that regulates money flow. So, how much money do we print? How much do we take out of print? How much money does a bank have to have in the vault at any point in time? We'll talk about the Federal Reserve in great detail in Unit 10, but for now, all you really need to know is that the president is in charge of how our economy is doing, and they suggest a budget that helps us spend our money as wisely as he or she deems possible. All right, number 7 is party leader. Okay, not a party like, woo, we're going to hang out. All right, this is your political party, and they're the head of his or her party, and they uphold their party platform. So you are supposed to be the leader of your party, not only in Congress, but also across the United States. You're supposed to be someone that members of your party can look up to and want to be. All right, they also endorse candidates. All right, so coming up in November, we know that we vote every November, even if we don't vote on the president. So this coming November, there are quite a few seats in Congress that are up for grabs, and either a Democrat can get them, or a Republican, or maybe someone in a third party. So the president is a Republican, so he's going to go and endorse or support a candidate who is Republican, because if you're the president, you want your party to have a majority all the time. That's your goal. All right. They might speak at rallies and campaigns, all this good kind of stuff, right? That's party leader. All right, number 8 is head of state. You act as a representative and living symbol of the USA. So an example of this is like pardoning turkeys, decorating the national Christmas tree, throwing out the first pitch, doing the Easter egg toss on the White House lawn, that kind of thing. All right, we're going to move on from this video because we can watch it later. All right, the governor, that's all you got to write for this. The governor has almost all the same roles as the president, but at the state level. So the governor would manage the state bureaucracy. The governor would be the party leader for North Carolina, ... There's a couple differences, though. There are 3 total. All right, there are no diplomats at the state level, and I hope you can answer why not. They also suggest the North Carolina budget, and it must be balanced. We cannot be in debt in North Carolina in our budget, unlike the United States. So we don't bring in as much money as we spend in our U.S. budget, but you must do that in a North Carolina budget. And also, the governor does not appoint judges because North Carolina judges are elected, okay? So the governor doesn't just get to pick who he or she thinks is the best for the job in terms of being a judge because NC judges are elected. All right. So here's a couple examples of those. I'm going to leave this up here for a second, and that'll be our question to end us out. And maybe you can, from left to right, top to bottom, see if you can correctly identify these roles.